on with the artists and kind of nurture that and facilitate these conversations with the Sustainable Culture Lab. I will let Barrett kind of talk a little bit more about the Sustainable Culture Lab before I kind of let him take it off. From there, you can ask questions and kind of participate in the conversation through the chat. Questions we will actually get to at the end of the artist talks, so that way we can just kind of like keep things moving along. Like I said, you'll get a follow-up email with all the links and any of resources that the artists share throughout the talk. So go ahead, Mr. Barrett Pittner.
Hello, hey everyone. So just want to do a quick intro. I'm Barrett. I'm with oh, perfect, speaker view. So I'm Barrett Pittner. I'm with the Sustainable Culture Lab, and this conversation we're talking a lot about the Eǔtopia. And so Eǔtopia is a word that's really significant for our work, and it is the best way to describe it is if you look at the word utopia, where it's the spelling of utopia. If you spell Eǔtopia, there's an E on the front of that, and that E means good, and topia means place. And so that the word itself means good place. Now, the interesting part about the word is that utopia, we think that means good place, but that word actually doesn't mean that. And so how that word came into being in 1516, this British philosopher, theologian, Thomas More, got the Greek prefix EU, which means good, and the prefix OU, which means non-existent. And he just cut off the E and the O and put that onto topia. So he made a word that means non-existent good place. And when he made this non-existent good place, people kind of missed the joke. And they've been trying to make utopias ever since. And for some reason, no one seems to have caught on. And so if you're in a society where you're trying to make a good place and do good things, and you actually don't have a word that means good place, the word that you think means good place means non-existent good place, that's going to be a clear impediment for imagining and articulating the good type of place you want to live in and create. And so part of the work for SCL, in addition to our focus on this other word, ethnocide, is focusing on what Eǔtopia means, what it looks like, the culture you need to cultivate, and the spaces you need to make to create a sustainable, good place. And so our collaboration with SAMASAMA is, part of us doing a philosophy and Eǔtopian practices and creating spaces for artists of color to come in and show and share their work is also quite significant for our work. And so that's Eǔtopia in a nutshell. But as the event progresses, we'll talk a bit more about Eǔtopia and other words and art and things of that nature.
Yeah, so one of the things that we found were really important, and like we said, we were kind of yearning and seeing through these collective art shows that SAMASAMA was doing, was how unique or that specific artist was speaking to that specific narrative, and how diverse and how multifaceted and how multi-layered it was. And so being able to partner with a group like the Sustainable Culture Lab, which really is going into sort of the fundamental and the foundation of culture, especially, which is so important right now during this social political shift that this country is going through. We wanted to use artists' work. Sorry, we don't mean use, but we wanted to highlight artists' work to put more of an experience, more of like a vision and a universal way to experience and the humanity behind these stories. So that is why we really value our artists, and I think there's such a huge part into the philosophical aspect of our culture, the way that we think, the way that we approach our politics, our community. Every part of that, I think artists play a huge role. We should value them more, and we do value them here, obviously, in this space. And by kind of creating Diaspora Month and highlighting the artists under these themes, we're able to kind of connect it to migration, heritage, DC diaspora specifically, politics, Eǔtopia, and it becomes such a such a great way for us to kind of all connect. But yeah, so we don't have to get started quite yet, but if you're ready, Lovely, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. I don't want to put you on the spot a little bit too early, but if you're down, I will do so.
Oh, absolutely. I'm down.
Okay.
I'm good.
I'm really excited about Lovely. I try not to get too personal in the intros because then I would be rambling about my personal feeling about every particular artist. So I won't do that. But I will say, you know, I'm really excited about this one specifically too with Barrett. You know, you and both Lovely come from really intellectual spaces, like very specific intellectual spaces. And to see, you know, you, Barrett, really embracing the arts community, and then Lovely, you know, a lot of your work is rooted in art as well, you know, as a medium and as a vehicle to the conversations that connecting into nuclear policy. I'm really excited for you both to actually kind of hear each other speak and be in this space together. But I'm gonna go ahead and do a nice little brief intro. Lovely Umayam is a research analyst and project manager at foreign policy think tank Stimson Center. Lovely is the founder and chief writer for Bombshelltoe, a blog featuring stories about nuclear history, politics, art, and media. Her work currently focuses on innovative ways to promote and incentivize weapons of mass destruction, non-proliferation, as well as examining the intersection between weapons of mass destruction, non-proliferation, and global trade development, among many things that she represents. And also I want to throw out there before you start too, Lovely is one of the co-founders, co-creators of the Color Curtain Project that Tammy Nguyen, who was one of the artists of the first week, presented. But yeah, take it off, Miss Lovely.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and congratulations for an amazing month of programming. This series has been really refreshing for me, just to learn about other artists, but also spend some time with, you know, really good friends that I haven't seen in a really long time. So shout out to you, Les and Seda, and also really excited to meet Barrett through these talks. I think right off the bat, I just want to recognize that what I'm about to present is going to be very different, because I don't necessarily identify as an artist in the traditional sense of having a singular craft. I write and I collaborate with various artists to create beautiful things together. And what makes it particularly interesting in this context of achieving Eǔtopia is that the pieces that we work on start in a place of dystopia, a world with nuclear weapons. And in making art and partnering with creative people, we then hopefully challenge a broader set of audiences to think about what we can do to arrive at this better place. And perhaps, you know, a place that doesn't necessarily rely on these tools of violence and power. And so there's a lot of moving pieces to my story. So I hope you follow. So I'm gonna share my screen right now so you can view my presentation. So my, hopefully you can see it now. So this is the name of my policy and arts collective, Bombshelltoe. And before I actually present the art pieces that I've been working on, I wanted to give you a little bit more context of who I am and what I do, since it deeply informs the artwork. So first and foremost, I'm Filipino American, and Les, this picture is for you, for all the Filipinos in the audience. This will make sense. So I immigrated to the United States at the age of 7. So I was old enough to experience and have memories in the Philippines. And this photo is this photo is of you know, me and my mom. It's not my birthday, it's Michael's birthday, as you can see in the photo, but we're in Jollibee, which is the Filipino equivalent of McDonald's. And you know, this just goes to show that my family is very much a product of the Filipino diaspora. And given that, I've always been sort of fascinated by this idea that diasporic people are nowhere and everywhere at the same time. And by that, I mean that as we literally spread, we also tend to remain invisible and rendered invisible by systems of power. And this obviously manifests in so many different ways. But the most relevant for today is how I witnessed this time and again in my work as a nuclear policy researcher. And just to explain that a little bit, because there may be a lot of folks here not familiar with it, for about a decade now, I've been studying nuclear non-proliferation, which is, it simply means preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. And this study is a subset of foreign policy. And it really gained a lot of attention after 9/11, when people were worried about, weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs. So just to give you a sense, so currently there are 4,000 nuclear weapons around the world. The United States invented them and proceeded to use them in 1945 against Japan during World War II. And this year actually marks the 75th anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. And within that headcount of 14,000, the United States and Russia are sort of leading that pack of having about 6,000 nuclear weapons each. And so I just wanted to show you that, so you have a sense of, these are real. I think that as, common people, we kind of, we encounter these weapons through the news, if at all. Usually it's through pop culture, movies, books, even music. But in my line of work, they're very, very real. And there's a lot that goes into being a nuclear non-proliferation researcher. But one of the interesting, and I would say overlooked aspects of this work is its relationship with colonialism. And I think the physical exploitation of Black and brown bodies and lands. So just to give you an example, there is a pattern where some of the original nuclear weapon states tested in former colonies or territories. So just to list a few here, the uranium, which is a special sort of ingredient necessary to create nuclear weapons, and this was back then in the 40s, 50s, 60s, a lot of the first uranium ore, this rock, came from the former Belgian Congo and also places in Canada. And they were essentially used when the United States government as well as scientists were trying to figure out how to create this bomb. Nuclear testing was obviously a big part of that whole project, given that they need to be able to test their capabilities, ensure that these bombs work. And when you look at where these nuclear weapon states tested their capabilities, it's in places like, in the UK, they tested in Australia, in Kirimati, Christmas Islands. The French, they tested in Algeria in the Sahara Desert, Polynesia, Russia, they tested in Kazakhstan. And here in the United States, we also tested in various islands, particularly, the Marshall Islands, as well as in Nevada. And so that also affected a lot of indigenous communities in the United States. And so I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that, I found out that, even though this issue seems far removed from my personal experience, in the history, the work and the violence is always done at the expense of people who look like me. But if you look closely now, who is actually doing the research, who's doing the archiving, who are, you know, becoming diplomats, it's not us. We're definitely missing in essentially helping save the world and make sure that these weapons don't get used and are eventually dismantled. And here's a tidbit just to go full circle in the context of the Philippines. Very recently, I actually found out that the United States stored nuclear weapons in the Philippines during the Marcos era. And this only surfaced because of declassified documents that someone sort of encouraged through the FOIA, or the Freedom of Information Act. And so there's a lot of layers in these histories that show that we should be part of it, that we should be working on this, because these are our histories too. But it just, you know, it just hasn't sort of happened yet. So I wanted to now move on to the projects themselves. And the first one that I want to share with you all is called Ways of Knowing. And this is really the pioneering art project within my policy and arts collective, Bombshelltoe. And I would describe it as a learning and unlearning of nuclear histories. So given that I've worked in this field for about 10 years now, my upbringing in it is very traditional. You know, I read all of the old white people that I need to know in order to operate in this ecosystem that is the nuclear, you know, security community. And I never really, I guess, encountered scholars within these spaces that contributed to, in this case, the American nuclear legacy. So I really wanted to unpack that. I really want to unlearn things and also learn from the lived experience of some of these folks that have been, that have suffered because of this legacy. So this project is really exploring what happened in Navajo Nation and how this nuclear weapons legacy touches their lives. And really quickly, I learned that this is really a story about land. It's not necessarily a story about the weapon at all. In the late 1940s, there's this government entity called the Atomic Energy Commission. Now it's defunct. It doesn't exist anymore. But it essentially ushered this uranium mining boom, again, uranium being the special ingredient to create these nuclear weapons. They encouraged uranium mining in the Colorado Plateau because that's where it can be found in the United States. And the Colorado Plateau is spread across, you know, the four corners of the United States. So, you know, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. And of course, Navajo Nation and other indigenous communities, such as the Pueblos, are sort of concentrated in that area. And so a lot of the miners during that time were Navajo boys and men. And there are about 500 plus contaminated uranium mines till this day that haven't been cleaned up, that touched the nuclear weapons legacy. And it's sort of complicated in that, you know, there was a point where, you know, the United States really stopped mining uranium for weapons. It went to nuclear power, but it's still the same thread of exploitation. So I really wanted to learn about that. And in order to do that, I had to go to Navajo Nation. And so part of this project is just going to the land, acknowledging the people, collaborating with them, understanding their histories and their stories. And I do want to give a shout out to the Ways of Knowing team, because I couldn't do this all by myself. Part of that team entails Adriel Lewis, who I think is watching right now, who is also my partner. He really helped give me the skill sets to build community with these folks who understandably so, are skeptical about this project because I'm this lady from Washington, D.C. There's already a lot of mistrust there in the beginning. We also traveled with two other artists, photographer Carmel Garcia. So this is her beautiful photographs, as well as Kayla Briett, who is a director. We decided that, this whole project will produce a film, and that will be sort of one of the core pieces that we will present at the end of this endeavor. And of course, and you'll hear from her later on, Miss Sunny Dooley, who is instrumental in this project. She is a Navajo elder, storyteller, and she welcomed us in her home. So here's just a few pictures from Carmel's role of photography taken in 2018 and 2019. This is Kayla during our film, and that's actually our camera. And just really quickly, we decided to do a 360 virtual reality film instead of a standard video format, because we really wanted to recognize the land as a living character. It's not just passive. And for those who've never been to the American Southwest, specifically in the areas of Navajo Nation, it's incredibly gorgeous. It's everywhere. It's around you, these mountains, these beautiful landscapes. And we wanted to showcase that respectfully in the film. And currently we are, in post-production. I can't show you the film just yet. We were able to screen it in Navajo Nation last September. We had a select group of community members essentially look at it and provide us feedback. We really wanted to embed this sense of due diligence into the work. Again, something that you don't necessarily see in scholarship, right? There's always this weird divide or barrier between the subject. And we really wanted to eliminate that. This is a community-centered project. And so that's also the reason why it's taking us so long to produce the film, because we need to go back and make sure that we're telling the story correctly. And this is Tina, by the way. She's another documentary filmmaker. She's Navajo. The film that she created is called Yellow Fever, and it's about her family experiencing the ramifications of uranium mining because her grandfather was a uranium miner, and he unfortunately, he passed away because of the health effects of working in that sector. And she's been an amazing champion of the Ways of Knowing work. And I hope this works. I wanted to bring in Sunny into the conversation because, again, this is really about trust. And I was reading a little bit about Eǔtopia, and the pillars of that word. And part of that is just creating space for community, because that typically that is essentially eliminated by ethnocide, right? You don't allow for that kind of public convening. And so because this project centers on Navajo stories, on histories, I just thought that it would be appropriate to bring her into our conversation. She can't be here today, but I did record a snippet of our conversation with her permission. And what you're going to hear is essentially a summary of how we met, because how we met was also very serendipitous in that we were invited to this event. It's a summit full of nuclear policy experts. Sunny, as a Navajo storyteller, was actually the odd one out, but they decided to include a community member into this conference. And she was also invited to speak at this conference. And so what you're about to hear, hopefully, is her talking about that experience from her perspective, being the outsider, having to confront these nuclear policy experts about her reality. So if you guys can just like give me a thumbs up if you hear it, or just like flag me somehow if it's not working, but hopefully it does.
Fireside just consisted of 3 people. I could be wrong. So the first guy came and talked, and then and he was a reporter.
Mm-hmm.
And then another guy talked, and then it was my turn, and I actually asked to be reoriented to the directions, because I asked the man whose house this was which direction was north, and I wanted to fit in the proper context of me telling the story, and me being situated between the west and the south, right here. That's where a storyteller sits. But because this particular trip and this particular conference really, I felt, because I'm a spiritual person first and foremost, I knew it wasn't by accident that I was there. And so I asked to sit facing north. And so people had to reshuffle around in this big house, mm-hmm. so that I could face north. And the man whose house this was says, "This is perfect north." And so I sat facing towards a very slender window. And I talked about the experiences of arriving, of being there, of listening, and how the talk was not grounded or rooted in anything other than an artificial sense of power. And I say that because nuclear weapons, yes, are powerful, but all they are based in is in complete destruction of everything. And so I come from a land that was destroyed by the uranium, mm-hmm. that is refined to be put into anything nuclear oriented. So I talked about that, and I talked about the fact that I live in a nation where there are 528 plus abandoned uranium mines, and we now are living with the 70-year legacy of contamination of earth, air, water, birds, animals, reptiles, insects, shrubbery, and of course humans. And we have very large health disasters affiliated with this. And I don't think these individuals at this summit had actually seen someone, a person with 5 fingers, that walked out of this kind of a disastrous area. And for me, that was letting them know that the footprints of this industry always walks into lands where, yes, they are beautiful, they are breathtaking, they are just awesome real estate on earth. And then the destruction takes place, and then those footprints walk back out. And I will tell you, to this day, 2020, I have yet to meet a nuclear physicist, scientist, and this bump or elbow bump their being, because they come in and they leave. There's no relationship built. They take what they want, and we're left with the residue. And at that summit, this was what I expressed to them. And I basically said, "Where are your hearts? Do you have a heart and the place was completely quiet. I don't think it was a good dinner experience for everybody. That's what I recall.
That's
And
nice.
so, yeah, so after that, you know, you made contact with me. We started talking. And when you came out here during another event that I put together that was called Elemental Talks and Dialogue, you know, the elements, earth, water, air, fire, you came out, and that's when we started the conversation, and I think with real intention to do something in a really different and radical way, which is to address this issue from the point of view of healing and making it so that maybe in 70 years, some of this land that has been contaminated, yes, it's still going to be contaminated because, you know, radioactive activity goes on forever, but perhaps in the next 70 years, we can heal the Navajo people, the Diné people. So it's again, which means that even though there's such a strong force of destruction, I believe that we can rise from there and heal. And you just have to look at places like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And, you know, the human spirit there has been really resilient and strong. And they've moved forward.
So that's Sunny. Hopefully you heard some snippets of it. I know it's going out in and out a little bit, but I can also share this with Seda and Barrett, and maybe embed it somehow into the video. But obviously, you know, she is testament to how it's very difficult to bring these different voices at the table, especially the table that can actually make a difference. And that's what really Bombshelltoe projects are about, is a hybrid of art as well as rigorous research and community kinship and activism to push this forward. And I think it can be very difficult for people to say, oh, you guys are just a bunch of activists, when really we really have a good grounding in the policy and we actually know what we're talking about. So the last thing that I wanted to share with you is actually my own artwork. Now that I have a little bit more time because of COVID, I'm also exploring something that I stopped doing many, many years ago, which is collage making. And so this is just an example of a piece that I did. It's called June Mirage, and I did this back in 2018. And this is a commentary on the crazy events of June 2018, which was, you know, if for those who perhaps follow foreign policy, that was the time when, you know, 45 was meeting with Kim Jong-un from North Korea. There was some talks of, you know, finally ending the war between South and North Korea. And it was also the time when, you know, we were detaining a lot of undocumented immigrants. I think that about 42,000 undocumented immigrants were detained by ICE in fiscal year 2018. And so I essentially did this collage based on a series of photos that just came out during that time frame. The flowers are, you know, a compilation of the American and North Korean flag, as well as the ballistic missiles that North Korea was currently testing and tinkering with at that time, and also some sort of aerial shots of the detention center. And so these are just parts of some of the source images that I used in order to compile that. And just one last thing, I also included, excerpts of the speeches that Trump made. And it was just really jarring because he did two separate speeches, one about immigrants and how, they should go back where they came from. And then I think several weeks later, he was talking about the importance of unifying the Koreas and how relatives should be together again. And, history shouldn't repeat this. And so there was just a lot to unpack there. And I wanted to express myself through this art piece. But ultimately, I hope that Bombshelltoe moving forward, engages with, Korean historians, Korean American artists that can really, again, unpack and unlearn and relearn with me. And so hopefully this is a piece that will have a larger life later down the line. So I think I'll stop there. Hopefully I didn't take up too much time. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other artists. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Yeah, thank you. That was really good. And Seda, so are we going to ask questions now, or are we going to want to go straight to the next?
We can actually chat a little bit. Peap is trying to log in, so we can give him a little bit of flex time over there. And we can actually
in Cambodia, so we're giving him some leeway. But so I have some thoughts, because the Sustainable Culture Lab, we position ourselves as a cultural think tank, and like the word that I started with talking about was Eǔtopia, but throughout the Diaspora Peoples Month, the main word that I've been focusing on with that SCL talks about is ethnocide, which is like the destruction of culture while keeping the people. And I connected to the transatlantic slave trade. But ethnocide happens to all sorts. It's not just an exclusive like African American thing. It's it happens via colonization and impacts all various communities of color. The focusing on the transatlantic slave trade makes it clearer for people to see like ethnocide with it, where it's not being mixed with genocide and all sorts of various things, like, this is ethnocide, and we can see, now it's being attached, applied to indigenous people. This is how it looks in America to this day, and how it impacts, all sorts of different communities. And so the combination of art and policy that you're doing is just great, because it's right up what we try to do, because with ethnocide, we acknowledge that if you destroy culture, you have to then create institutions that cultivate and create culture. And that's a key facet of everything. So like organizationally, like we've spent this whole year focusing on culture and not on policy, because we have to do the cultural connections, connecting with artists and coming up with that cultural discourse to then even be able to do, policy or all the other components that are important in society. And so I just kind of wanted to start with that, but now I want to go into nuclear stuff, because one of my favorite books is called Something Incredibly Wonderful Happens, about Frank Oppenheimer. And like Frank is Robert Oppenheimer's younger brother, and it's this wonderful story about, if you look at Robert, he had that famous quote about how he became death, the destroyer of worlds, which was like a kind of like a misinterpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, but still, like, it's a storyboard of like a white man trying to do something he thought was good, and realized he now unleashed a fury on the earth that he never imagined possible. And in the book about his younger brother, Frank was like the young guy on the Manhattan Project. He was just like a really talented physicist who was also like, he attended a couple communist rallies and was kind of a hippie. He was just like a hippie. He was a physicist. And then due to like the chaos of America, he got blacklisted and he couldn't get a job. And by the end of his life, he made like this really incredible, like cultural, like science museum called the Exploratorium in San Francisco. And so I love that story because it shows the importance of culture and art within physics, and in particular, like nuclear energy. And clearly, I really enjoyed the connection you did with colonization being an integral part of building these nuclear weapons, because that is a continuation of ethnocide and or genocide in these various parts of the world. And so it's various levels of destruction that are being used to create an unimaginable degree of destruction, which even now, like our nuclear weapons are so much more powerful than they were during World War II. It's hard for people to even comprehend how much could just disappear in a matter of minutes if one of those things was ever used. And so anyways, I just really, really enjoyed it. And it made me think about, like, it's funny, I looked up at my bookshelf and I saw that book right there. I read it before I came up with the word ethnocide and started all this work. I was like, there's a connection there. That's interesting. I really enjoy that book. But
yeah, if I could just add to that, thank you so much for that intervention. So two things. One, for the folks in the audience, I would love for you guys to do this really simple exercise of just Googling nuclear and like wherever you think is home. To me, that's the Philippines. For some folks, it could be multiple places, but there's always this really interesting connection, right? I wouldn't have found out about nuclear weapons being stored, or American nuclear weapons being stored in the Philippines, if I didn't believe that there was an entanglement there that just hasn't been really explored. And I think that no one would really think about doing that research except for people who, like me, because that it's important to me to understand these histories. And so, nuclear issues may be weapons or energy, and I'm more focused on the legacy of nuclear weapons. There's these really interesting connections that you will always find in different locales. And it'll really challenge you to think, I thought that, this is not something I should care about. There's too many things going on. This is really just science fiction. But in my 10 years of work, it's just not true. And I would say that, because nuclear weapons exist, these are higher order manifestations of what happens in our neighborhoods. It's essentially the use of violence in order to ensure security. That's what it is. And so I think that's just really important to keep in mind. And then the last thing I wanted to say was about this idea of creating new institutions. Because, as someone who's worked in Washington, D.C. in traditional think tanks, this intersection of art and policy and science initially feels really clunky to a lot of these traditional spaces, because it's never something that they've welcomed or thought would be effective. But it's always, those connections have always been there. And I think that's part of maybe why ethnocide is particularly devious, right? Because, you would think these connections don't matter or don't exist, and yet they've always been there. It's just that our institutions have never prioritized imagining what they could look like if you formalize them and legitimize them. And I think that that's why, Sustainable Culture Lab and Bombshelltoe are really at the forefront of pushing things, because the way that young people think now, it's very global. It's all like, a combination of culture, science, policy, and we need to start catering to that next generation. So it's really, really exciting to be connected with you, Barrett.
No, the excitement is mutual. And I'll say, like, a key thing, because I'm in DC, and there's the whole think tank infrastructure here, and it's not as effective as people like to think it is. And there's some glaring gaps, and as people of color, when we get in those spaces, we we see the gaps, and we also see people tell us that those gaps don't exist. And so, like, as a journalist, one of the key things I started noticing as just in my profession is that the language to describe the type of terror or atrocity that was happening to Black people, there just wasn't a language that I felt really articulated what was going on. And so that's why I started looking for words, and I found this word ethnocide. And the thing that was really fascinating about ethnocide is that Raphael Lemkin came up with this word in 1944, and he also created the word genocide at the same time. And prior to him making the word genocide, Europeans and the rest of the world had more language to articulate how atrocities weren't atrocities, how like states, it was their sovereign right. If they wanted to like exterminate a bunch of their people, well, hey, you know, they let them do it. That's their country, they're in charge. That was like the discourse that had existed in the world. And until he brought in a new language, a new word, and articulated it, people weren't able to understand that genocide was a real thing. And I think what's happening, you know, what happens in the US is the word ethnocide isn't a word that people know. And so people have more language to justify the transactional exploitative relationships that America has always forged, but they don't have a word to articulate why that's detrimental, and then a word for what could be something good that you could do in response. And so like Eǔtopia actually came about after I would talk to people about ethnocide. They get all sad and they would just be like, what can I do? I don't feel like I can do anything. And it's like, oh man, let me give you a new word. And so like you need that balance. But when you were talking to the indigenous one, what was her name? It was with an S. Sunny?
Sunny, yeah, Sunny.
Perfect. Like when Sunny talked about how people came to their land and didn't form a relationship, just took things, and when they had taken what they wanted, they just left. And she asked them if they had a heart. When she told that story, it reminded me of gentrification. Because like when I talk about gentrification, it's not that people have a problem with having neighbors that are white or anything like that. Is that when people move into the community, they're not moving into the community to become a part of it. It's a very transactional relationship. Like they'll live right next to you and they won't talk to you. They won't form those neighborly bonds that are what being a neighbor and living in an environment's all about. They'll move in, and the goal for many people, and this is what America tells you to do, is, you know, this might be your starter home, and you live there for like 5 years, and if you do this, this, and that, then you'll move to some other place, or then you could flip this, and you can make more money, and it's all about how can I go into some environment and get something without actually being part of a community. And so seeing how like that connection that is part of our complaints regarding gentrification is the same narrative, the same complaint that someone was talking about, like, you know, nuclear proliferation and the exploitation of indigenous people, was really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's thank you so much for that. And that's also why Ways of Knowing is particularly tricky as a project, if I'm going to be honest, because I'm very aware of who, like, my role and who I come off as in, you know, engaging Navajo community members. And even though I'm, you know, Filipino American, and I'm a little bit more attuned to, you know, power dynamics, I'm still an outsider, right? Trying to get in. And so that's the reason why Sunny, as well as Tina, the documentary filmmaker, and we have also partnered with Janine Yazi, as well as Professor Perry Charlie, Tommy Rock, all these folks, Bobby Leonard Mason, you know, it really took work. And I think in the traditional think tank driven environment, you know, for projects like this, it's always about output. Like, where is it? Where is the film? You know, like, where? And I'm trying not to play into that, because community work means you got to be patient and you got to just build trust. And that's really the heart of the project anyway, film or no film. You know, the fact that I you know, I now intimately understand you know, an indigenous community in the United States means a lot to me, because I came here as a Filipino, you know, buying into the American dream and never really factored in, you know, the concept of indigeneity in being an American until this project, you know. And what's crazy about it is I don't think I would have had the same outlet if I wasn't a nuclear policy expert. So in a really weird way, this super technical, exclusive topic and subject became the entry point to having that intimate connection with a person like Sunny. And I just hope that, you know, other nuclear policy experts, other scientists are giving or are given the same opportunity, because I think that would actually enrich their work. You know, their work will actually mean something. You know, one of the dark comedies in my line of work is that we'll always have work because nuclear weapons will always exist, right? But you know, and then that's how we just end up kind of falling into, oh, we're just doing this to pay the bills. We're not, you know, and we start accepting, oh, the US and Russia won't really, like, you know, dismantle their nuclear weapons, and the other countries won't follow suit. Well, we just start accepting that as a norm in our field. And part of that, I think, is because we don't have the real personal connections with people who've already suffered. And I think that if you develop that kinship, that relationship with people who have already suffered and continue to suffer, the work will feel more urgent, and it's not going to be an intellectual exercise anymore. But anyway, that's.
I love it. This is exactly like the perfect Eǔtopia conversation that we're like getting into, and we'll actually come back to. So it's kind of great to kind of set it up, and then we're gonna bring in Peap Tarr from Cambodia, who has zoomed logged in. I'm sweating from the Zoom connection, but I'm going to introduce him, and then we'll kind of really kind of bring everybody back into the conversation. And everybody, please, just reminding everyone, just put in the chat if you guys have like a thought or a question that you kind of want to come back to, because as we continue to talk, there's always going to be something new that's going to be inspiring us to you know, just talk about. So put a thumbs up that you're ready to go, because I'm going to introduce you. Give everybody a all right. Right, Mr. Peap Tarr is of mixed heritage. His mother Khmer and father from Te Awamutu, New Zealand. As an Auckland native, Peap has continued to evolve his art style by combining his New Zealand and Cambodian heritage. Lisa Mam, his partner, is also Cambodia's first female Khmer urban street artist. She is a trailblazer, inspiring new urban art movements in her hometown of Phnom Penh. Lisa and Peap are the pioneers of the Cambodian street art scene. Their style of street art has influenced both local and international artists who have come to reside and pursue their creative endeavors in the Kingdom of Cambodia. They have both influenced an evolving art market for the next generation of Khmer artists to perceive their art with a more valuable lens. As far as people who are coming to reside and pursue endeavors in Phnom Penh, I'm coming for you. I really miss Cambodia, so you can go ahead and unmute. I can unmute you here.
Okay, cool. Hello.
Hey, Peap. So before you start, I just want to say we're really excited to have you. I know that you are on a different time zone, as well as, you know, Jackie was also on our team. So we really appreciate everybody logging in, no matter where it is they are.
Sure. Awesome. Oh, okay. So, so I introduce. I start talking, right? Okay.
Oh, they don't
okay.
have Zoom in Cambodia?
Sorry, what's that?
You don't have Zoom in Cambodia?
No one really uses it here, and we kept getting used that like people I think because some of the universities here, they were closed down for a while because of well, actually they're still closed down And so they were trying to decide to use Zoom, you know, for online lectures and stuff for the COVID situation. Yeah, and then a lot of people were told not to use Zoom because like people jump in and out. Like people jump into like, you know, meetings or something. So yeah, everyone just didn't really use it, kind of. Yeah. Yeah. So I just start talking about what we do, right? That's what I'm doing.
Let's talk. Yeah, tell us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. All right. I wasn't sure. All right. So yeah. So okay. Just like Sadie was saying. So you know, my name's Peap, and actually I was born in New Zealand. You know, my dad's from New Zealand. My mother's Cambodian, and I pretty much like we move back and forth. I guess I'll give a background. And you know, we moved over to Australia, to Sydney, and you know, but we moved around a lot. Like we also lived in Thailand when I was younger because my mom was actually doing her PhD on the ethnic Khmer. So the ethnic Khmer that they've always been in Thailand, and they, you know, it's just from, you know, and she was doing her study on basically they're the sort of the original Cambodian, you know, they've always been in Thailand when it was once still Cambodia, parts of it. And so I grew up a little bit in Thailand as well, and I learned to speak Thai. And I don't really speak much Cambodian, even though I live in Cambodia. So I can speak Thai, and I well, of course, I speak English. And growing up in New Zealand, so just to understand New Zealand, New Zealand has New Zealand was colonized by the British, and the indigenous people of New Zealand, Māori. I don't know if people in the States know much about New Zealand culture or history, but it's very similar to Hawaii. Hawaiian and New Zealand culture is very, very identical, even some of the words. And interestingly enough, the Māori language is actually, oh, whoops, sorry. That's my alarm. And the what do you call it? The Māori language has a lot of similarity to the Japanese language, which is interesting. And so anyway, for me growing up in New Zealand, like being half Cambodian, people in New Zealand don't really know much about Cambodia. When I said I'm half Cambodian, most people thought I was saying I was half Colombian because they know where Colombia is, but have no idea where Cambodia is. and in New Zealand, people are mixed, you know. I mean, everyone's mixed with, you know, there's a lot of mix of like European with Māori, with Polynesian. So, you know, I just blended right in really because, you know, when people are mixed, you can never tell where anyone's from really. And so growing up in New Zealand, I was exposed more to a Polynesian culture than Cambodian culture. I learned, I would learn about Cambodian culture through my mom, and you know, just through what she knew and stuff like that. And I guess eventually, when I got older, when we moved to Sydney, I got where we lived in Sydney is called Glebe, so it's like the inner city. And, you know, graffiti culture, hip hop culture, all that had traveled to Australia, had traveled to, oh wait, hang on, what's that? Oh, okay. Oh, right, you can see stuff, right, okay. So yeah, so basically this, you know, that culture had traveled to New Zealand and Australia, especially in New Zealand through, you know, Polynesian people as well, because they got relatives back in the States, you know, and they would bring it over, right? And so that I think the part that interests me a lot, of course, was the music and also the graffiti element. And so, you know, I'll try and do my own, you know, I just like copy stuff and, you know, just what I saw, right? But it wasn't until probably like, you know, just to jump forward and everything, it probably wasn't until like early 2000s where I started to blend more with the Cambodian element, because in the 90s we had a chance to go to Cambodia, and my mother was like reunited with her family in Cambodia. I sort of jumped a little bit of the story, but yeah, basically my mom and dad got married in Cambodia just before the Khmer Rouge came. And so, yeah, they were still here when the Khmer Rouge entered the city, and my mom was separated from her family. And, you know, anyway, they had to walk from Phnom Penh all the way to Thailand. And then from Thailand, they went to New Zealand, right? With, you know, well, my dad's from New Zealand, so, you know, that's how they're able to get to New Zealand, basically. But anyway, jumping back again. So yeah, when I went to visit Cambodia with my mom and my dad early on, you know, and meet my Cambodian relatives, and we went to Angkor Wat and everything, and that's where, you know, I got to see more of, you know, my mom's heritage or my mom's culture. And I think that's what inspired me a lot in terms of how to create my artwork. And pretty much was, you know, I just like I started to experiment more, you know, experiment with sort of infusing my Cambodian heritage with my New Zealand heritage. And when I say New Zealand heritage, because New Zealand has a mixture of everything, you know, we have a mixture of Māori, of people from Samoa, Tonga, Rarotonga, basically all the islands, right? So all the islands of the Pacific. So, you know, that was a strong influence in my upbringing and where I went to school and my friends and everything. And so, you know, I just basically would blend those elements and of design with Cambodian design, but make it my own version. And I guess like early on, like that's what kind of got attention. Like I didn't really like go out to be an artist or to really aim to be like in a gallery or anything like that. I was just painting with friends, and you know, I actually went to study design at uni because, you know, I mean, I would paint before. I would paint on the street and stuff. And, you know, when I was younger, my mom said, you know, you can't just be painting on the street. You're not going to earn money like that. So I went to do study graphic design, right? So I could be a designer. And so that's what I was doing. But I just kept painting with my friends. And I think painting on the street, it gave me, it got attention by actual galleries, right? And I got pulled into a gallery, and you know, it was like type of I remember it was sponsored by this radio station in New Zealand called My FM, which focuses a lot. It's a Māori station, but they focus a lot on like Māori music, Polynesian, hip-hop music, current, you know, a bit of everything. What the youth are into, basically. And they sponsored the show, and it was at a gallery called Disrupt Gallery, which was a graffiti gallery, street art type of gallery in New Zealand, in Auckland, New Zealand, where I'm from. And yeah, I mean, the painting I put in there, it sold, and it sort of made me realize that, oh, okay, so I guess some people do appreciate my work. And the lady that bought my painting put me in her show. You know, she had like a coffee shop, and you know, it's just like a small beginning, and from there, like I sold some more work, and I started to get more into it. And you know, just over time, I started getting attention, like from media and stuff like that. So I just pursued while I was working as a designer, just kept pursuing my art career, and I just kept painting with friends. You know, I didn't really take everything so serious. And yeah, if anyone want to ask me questions too, just let me know. I'm not sure with Zoom. I'm just going to keep talking, so you can just see all the images of our artwork. And anyway, so it was about 2010. I headed over to Thailand and then Cambodia, And I didn't have an intention of staying, just like coming to visit. And it was 2011 I met Lisa in Phnom Penh. And at the time, she was still, because she's by the way, she's a doctor dentist as well. And so she was still studying her doctor dentistry, which, you know, is a 7-year course. And but she, you know, we met, we connected, and because she liked painting. And so, you know, I could see she was very good. And I just like said, oh, she should, you know, we should paint together. She should paint with me. And, you know, basically that's what happened. We just kept painting together. And I think me and Lisa painting together, brought us a lot of attention. Like, we didn't set out to really do, you know, anything. And I don't know, we just were doing it just because we like painting and stuff like that. And, you know, we were painting on the street. We got some actual commercial gigs because I think it was like noticeable to people. And I wouldn't say we're, you know, I know people, it's written that we're like pioneered the street art movement, but I wouldn't say that, like the street art movement in Cambodia, that is. I mean, because I don't like the word pioneer of any, because I don't know, I think it goes all the way back to early on in history. Like, people painted on caves and stuff, even in Australia. Like, you know, the indigenous people of Australia, the Aboriginal people, they painted on caves like maybe like 40 or 80,000 years ago. So, but yeah, I guess, you know, the culture comes out of the States, really, you know, out of New York, Philadelphia. We had early graffiti writers, and anyway, but you know, we just kept doing what we did, and eventually we got attention in Thailand as well, and which is a cool thing, because being able to do a Cambodian, well, what we did was basically, you know, fusing our Cambodian culture and with like graffiti culture, but I would say more in the street art culture, you know, because we weren't really doing letters, we're just doing the patterns and elements of Cambodian culture, and for me, elements of New Zealand culture as well. And, you know, we painted that on walls and everything. And I think anything, when you paint large or huge scale, it always gets attention. And so we just kept doing stuff, and we're able to build a bridge with Thailand too, which I'm very happy about, because, you know, I don't know if people know that, you know, within Southeast Asia, and, you know, there's a lot of sometimes animosity because of history between Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, this kind of thing, right? And so for me, I think that's old-fashioned, and that, you know, we need to build together. And I feel like art, that's the great thing about art, it really builds, it ties people together, you know, and it's a great way of communicating. Like, it breaks down sort of walls, break down barriers, and because, you know, it's visually speaking, and I think everyone visually can sort of relate in some kind of way, right? So I'm just gonna have a drink. It's early in the morning. I'm just having some coffee.
Yeah, I know you woke up really early, and then, you know, first Zooms are always a little awkward because you're like, is anybody listening? Is anybody out there? But you're doing.
Yeah, I have no idea. I just keep blabbering.
No, it's fine. No, it's great. You know, and you know, you make a point about how, you know, how important it was for you to emphasize that, you know, you and Lisa aren't the pioneers, right? And I think you are still seen in that art community in Cambodia, and really internationally, especially for the Cambodian diaspora, and really anybody from a background that really connects with you as a pioneer when you have moved from a place like New Zealand to Cambodia.
Right.
One, you're a transplant, and in that sense, like, you know, maybe we'll ask about how you even really decided to make that move to stay in Cambodia.
Right.
But a pioneer in a sense where, like, there's a country who, you know, you and I have talked about this before, but the perception and the reception of modern art in Cambodia, and that shift right now, sort of, especially in that side of the world in Cambodia, where pop culture and art, it's not necessarily that it's underground, but for the presenting new art or modern art or different styles of art in a country that has eliminated art and rebuilding from nothing. And you have a Cambodians that are very connected to traditional art, because it's just so, that's what is so deep for them. So I imagine, like, talk a little bit about the conflict, or really the warm reception maybe, of your modern style of art, and how the locals take that, because again, I think that we've talked about it before. With Lisa being a Cambodian native, and her family sort of thinking, what do you mean you're going to study art or make art, or whatever it is, that's doesn't make sense. And I don't know if anybody here on the call today do come from sort of families and cultures that perceive art as a completely different, that they don't view it as a very valid industry, especially when it comes to modernizing it, or sort of the intersections of the different styles of art and the messaging, and as well as the influences on it on a political level. I mean, you can kind of chat a little about that, and that's why I say, you guys are a pioneer in that sense, that you've allowed people to kind of look at it and say, not only were you actually had the opportunity to make money off of it, if that is viewed as a way to validate it to Cambodians and as well as your families, but also as a way to spread a message. I remember the White Building in Cambodia, where they did a famous graffiti artist put an image there on the White Building. So if for anybody who's
El Mac, El Mac,
I mean, I like asking the question and then I'm carrying on, but go back to the question, but about the White Building too, because maybe it'll connect. So the White Building is this, before the genocide, was sort of like a public housing project in Cambodia. And my mom, actually being really, really poor when she was young, her and my grandmother actually lived in this building. So at some point, and it's actually a very, very, something about it is eerie and beautiful, and it's just like this white structure. But,
it doesn't exist now.
I know. I'm so sad that they took it down, and it's such a shame. But after the genocide, I mean, it was so crazy to see it so exposed, and people were still living in it. I mean, it's missing walls, dangerous, and a lot of artists kind of took space to it. But I mean, you can kind of take that. Adriel, you went to the White Building. I know, it's so crazy. Like I said, it's something about it is, it's just very special. But I think for Cambodians who are just trying to move forward from a genocide, it's like there's such a huge missing piece, and there's not enough time that is being taken, as well as education around these sort of foundational parts of Cambodia. But I mean, for me personally, my mom growing up so poor, she lived in that building at one point in her life.
Right. Yeah. Actually, I heard that building like in the, I guess it's the 70s, right? I heard that building actually housed a lot of creative types as well, like early on before the war. Like it was a lot of artists and performers and actors, musicians that apparently that lives in there. That's what I was told by some family, and Lisa's mom was telling us that as well. But I mean, after the war, it was just like, it was. I mean, it's just full of like, I mean, it was like a slum area basically. There was like prostitution going on there, drug dealing. All kinds of stuff going on in there.
And it's so crazy that when that was still happening on the later years of the White Building's existence, young artists were actually taking up space in that building to have art studios, which I thought was interesting.
After the war?
Recently, I think, like people were still living there. It was still considered, slums. But I remember the last time we visited before it was, before it's disappeared, and they were tearing it down, there were actually younger artists, again, similar to what the community is that you're connected with. And
it's going to be a condo.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, well, apparently like, well, even though it was torn down, but I can say how they did it. I think it wasn't too bad. It wasn't bad like some of the other places where they just evicted people, because people actually got paid like because it was actually the Japanese that bought it, and they actually paid everyone, like, I heard quite a decent amount of money. Like, I heard from actual people that lived in there. Like, I knew a guy that lives out in my mom's area in Takmau. He drives a tuk-tuk. I don't know if it's all true, but he was saying like his friend got paid quite well to move and everything. Like they got paid like as in really a decent amount of money. I'm not sure how much, but I don't know, that's what I heard. Yeah. So that was interesting.
It looks like oh yeah, maybe so we'll start getting into the questions, and again, everybody can talk to Lovely. We can start talking about a little bit more and close on Eǔtopia, and then Les is actually going to close out with a gig. But Monolith, who is one of the artists from one of our talks this week, who's also a street artist, and a lot of his work is very political. He asked, oh wait, no, actually he said he was definitely discouraged from doing anything artistic growing up and being artist. Yeah. But that's, yeah.
Okay, sure.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I can, yeah, I didn't mean to, yeah, I can answer that too. Like, I mean, okay, I can give you two different, like, from my background.
And also when you segue into that, Maria also asked about the significance of like the drawings. I know the style is really specific, so you can also give some insight on that specific style.
Sure. Well, I can say my upbringing was very like loose, like, because I mean, I was living on my own since I was 16, because my mom actually, well, my parents broke up, and my mom moved actually back to Cambodia early on, and my dad was just everywhere. So, I mean, that's how I kind of just could go loose with the what do you call it? with painting. And you know, and actually both my parents, you know, there's like, yeah, you know, if that's what you like doing, it's all good as well in some kind of way. But yeah, with Lisa, it's a bit different. I mean, I would say Lisa's mother was very encouraging to her, like, you know, very supportive. But her dad, you know, because she was starting to be a dentist, her dad believed that, well, you know, in Cambodia, like, especially women, you know, well, people here are not encouraged to be artists, put it that way. And art is seen as something that you cannot earn a living from. And you know, it's just like, yeah, it's how you're gonna survive. You know, most people, they expect people to be doctors, a business person, or you know, something, or you know, being in the government or something, right? You know, something that seems like high up. So I felt me and Lisa working together, and I think an important aspect of Lisa doing what she was doing was I guess that's a very important part, because I think younger people could see that Lisa being from here, because people kept thinking she was from overseas, you know, because they thought, oh, people that do this kind of thing must be from overseas. They can't be Cambodian. They can't be local. And the fact that, you know, me and her were getting shows overseas and doing like stuff with international brands, including Stussy. We did stuff with Stussy, which is from the States, but we did it with the division of the Stussy division in Japan, like a t-shirt design. And I think people seeing that, I think it encouraged and inspired a lot of like young people, and I think a lot of young female artists too, like young Cambodian artists. And I think by Lisa doing more and more of that, you know, even her dad or her family could come to see that, you know, oh, you know, you can, not that doing art should be all about money, because you do it. You just did it. I mean, what we did was just out of passion, right? We just love doing it, and we found success with it. And, you know, when you can find success with what you love doing, that's a great thing, because the more you can, you know, if you can earn from your art, you can do more art. You know what I mean? You can do it. I mean, we do it full time. That's what we do. Well, you know, Lisa still does a bit of part time, you know, with the dentistry, but you know, it's pretty much like full time, you know, and it's full time for me. So I think that inspired a lot of the younger artists coming up now. And it's interesting because now in Cambodia, there is a lot of young artists that like in the modern sense, you know, some of them, I don't know if they can particularly understand the culture or history of graffiti culture or you know, street art for that matter. But you know, they're finding their own type of way, and it's, you know, they're finding success too, like commercial success. So and you know, that's been within a span of 10 years, because me and Lisa painting together has been 10 years, like as in a duo. Yeah. Did I answer everything? Sorry. Oh, I can't hear you.
I got muted by accident.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you did, and I think that getting to and I'll just briefly say too about your style, so we get also answer a little bit of Maria.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah,
and it's okay because we actually have to start going back, and I think it also ties in the very traditional and almost like indigenous aspects of like your style in New Zealand, and then I think they kind of it makes me want to go back to a little bit of like Lovely as well, and you know, her work with Native communities. So I like that it's all intertwined and under this umbrella topic of Eǔtopia, right? You missed a little bit at the beginning, but when it comes to this aspect of Eǔtopia, I think it's also cool that we also ended with you, Peap, because you kind of went the opposite, I think, of the conversation from some of our other artists here in the States. Is like you've transplanted in a whole different ways, which is kind of encourages to look at it from a different lens of sort of the concept of diaspora and migration, right? Like, how do we create this space in this intersection, in this cross-cultural aspect of where it ties into Eǔtopia, right? So, you want to?
Sure.
Oh, Barrett. Oh, sorry. I think Barrett's going to say something.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So, yeah. So there's a lot to go in on this, but like a key thing with Eǔtopia is, you know, it means good place, but it means sustainable good place, because there's like, when we talk about good, we often confuse like objective and subjective good. So like, I use an example of bananas. Like, if I don't think bananas taste good, but that doesn't mean that bananas aren't good for you, because if you eat a banana, it sustains you, it's healthy, it's, you know, it's good for you. My subjective desire to not think it tastes good has no bearing on whether that is or isn't good. But if I enjoy eating a Big Mac and I say, oh, that tastes good, that doesn't mean that that's good for you. We know that that is something that's unhealthy because it's not sustainable. If you eat Big Macs every day, you're going to get clogged arteries, all sorts of ailments that are going to make you die earlier than you should. And so when we're talking about like a good place, an Eǔtopian place, sustainability has to be a key component, because that's actually like what good actually is sustainable. Like if you're talking about like a good friend, that's not because that person is like the funniest person or has the most money or whatever. Like, they're good because you expect to be their friend for like 50 years or something. Like, they're good because that's a friendship that you anticipate to be sustainable. And so like, one of the things that I thought was really cool as we talk about like Eǔtopian space and with the art that you guys have brought today is how there's a connection to indigenous people, the people that have an understanding of how to be sustainable in this place forever. Like, the goal of living there is to find a way to live in that place forever. You can't get much more sustainable than that, and that's good. What we're really talking about now is, due to like colonization and the capacity for people to move and go to so many different places, is that it's really easy to have transactional, unsustainable relationships with your environment, with the people around you, and that doesn't create good places or Eǔtopian places. And so I really, those themes like really hit home, especially like with Peap, with your conversation, just like how you culturally are in between these various places, and there's a clear desire to make sure that you authentically represent each of those facets without it being transactionally. You know, there's no desire to like exploit Cambodian culture in your art or to exploit New Zealand culture in your art. But like, as someone who has both of those, like, how can I merge these in a sustainable way and then just represent that culturally? And I think like this is the key question that we are like having as people. Oh, and another thing I thought was really good, Peap, about yours was how everyone in New Zealand, they're all mixed. So like no one knows where anybody is. And that is like becoming the sustainable culture of the place, where like there's a bunch of people, we don't know where they're from or what their background is, but like in New Zealand, we are trying to make something with this hodgepodge of who knows where they're from people. Like that's actually a pretty significant puzzle in the world that we're trying to solve today. And so
and you know, you just even saying that makes me think about like Lovely and her work. Like what are the cross like disciplinary type of approaches do we need to use you know, to begin evolving and moving further away from the ethnocidal aspect of American culture and societies and practices. And like Lovely's an amazing example of that, you know, where, you know, you come from these two different spaces and it, just like how important it is that you're still doing the policy and the nuclear work, but you're putting a different lens to it.
Do you mind if I just add to that? Because this in and of itself can be a whole like long conversation, but the abbreviated version of this is that, you know, it's something that the nuclear policy world is absolutely struggling with, because nuclear weapons as an issue, it sounds sexy in a sci-fi way, but it's not relevant or relatable or urgent given everything else that's happening in the world. And I think a lot of nuclear policy researchers like myself were continuously like thinking about, okay, how do we intersect, you know, hybridize or what have you, you know, this topic with climate change, with especially that, like the environmental movement, because there's actually a lot of connections there. Like, for example, you know, the nuclear testing that I talked about, there are, you know, islands in the Pacific, particularly the Marshall Islands, where there's still some radioactive spaces there. And because of rising tides, right, now there's some concern about these spaces essentially being submerged. And, you know, and what does that mean if these radioactive, you know, contaminated spaces, you know, end up cracking open because of the environmental degradation that's happening around it. So there is a natural connection there. But to your point, Barrett and Seda, the nuclear policy community doesn't necessarily know how to play nice with other, you know, other subjects or other topics, because we tend to just want to co-opt the message. You know, it's as opposed, and this is my personal opinion. Maybe if you talk to another policy person, they'll say, no, we've got it figured out. But I think part of that is because our space is still majority white, and a lot of our knowledge, our scholarship comes from the Cold War, right? And so even our thinking doesn't lend itself to making these connections and intersectionalities. And what I hope to do or see in the future is that more people who look like us, that have multiple homes, multiple identities, are able to hold these complexities, right? And feel very natural about, you know, making all these connections. I think we're going to be the people who will make it feel very natural, right? Because it's always been part of our psyche to think in a multitude of ways. And so just to point that out, that yes, there are intersections in the policy arena. I just don't think that we've done a good job, we being the nuclear policy community, in articulating that, because our body of scholarship, which is inherently white, really doesn't lend itself to community building. So
yeah, so just to continue off of that, like, so to go with the word ethnocide, like this is a cultural agenda that colonizers created to have a division at the foundation of the societies that they created in the Americas, and then to, you know, normalize systemic division. So like intersectionality runs counter to just like the founding like ideas of the societies in the Americas and colonization. And so like as an African American, like being Black in America is a mixture of all the people, you know, like if your parents, one parent's white and one parent's Black, like you're Black, but that's still a mixture of other, you know, so like in the US, like as an African American, intersectionality is just like a part of just being alive in many ways. As a white American, like their culture has been that they created was about not having that intersectionality, because that's how you sustain whiteness over the long haul. And so I think as America gets more and more diverse, and people of various backgrounds are like interacting with each other and intersecting, because that's like innate in like the non-white ethnocidal community, we have our voice, the language we use will change, our perspectives to the established, the status quo will be distinctly different. And like one thing that I say quite a bit, and we have a newsletter that goes out every Sunday called The Word, that has a new word of the week that you can learn. Hopefully it'll enlighten you. But the word we had this past week, in anticipation of this event, ethnocide and Eǔtopia were like months ago. Those are like the first ones. But this word was ethnogenesis, which, you know, when I view Eǔtopia, that's more of a place. That's like a place you try to, you know, live in, and you know, so it's like a proper noun, like, you know, Japan, you know? But the question is, what are the actions and stuff that you do to create an Eǔtopian space? And those actions would be ethnogenesis, which is like the birth of culture. If you live in a place that's ethnocidal, that lives off of the destruction of culture, you have to counter that by creating culture. And so I use the word ethnogenesis. I also use the word cultural naissance instead of renaissance. It means, you know, birth of culture. And it kind of reminds people that, you know, if you live in an ethnocidal place, you can't have a rebirth of your culture, because that would be a rebirth of ethnocide. You actually have to birth something new. And if you look at a lot of like Latin American countries, we don't really think about it, but they've birthed new cultures in those places where, like, you know, colonization, the colonizers were defeated, and, you know, they said, all right, there's a bunch of Spanish and indigenous people here, they've mixed, we've given the mixed people a new name, and now we're something distinctly unique, and this is our culture that we created that's not like anything else in the world. And so like what we do or trying to do here is definitely like combating ethnocide, engaging in ethnogenesis, fostering Eǔtopian spaces, and you know, the work that you guys do speaks to all of that, and it was really cool to like see it all.
I know we gotta end soon, and Les is gonna end the month with a nice set, so feel free to stay on as she plays. But, you know, before we end, I know we have a couple things to go. So you say a lot like the sort of the culture renaissance. What term was it that you used again? The culture renaissance. But anywho, my point is, what do you see as the difference between the need for new culture and when there's a third culture and subculture that occurs and happens as a form of sort of finding new ways to exist in a culture that doesn't always fit, or when it's evolving? Do you know what I mean when I kind of ask that? Cultural renaissance.
Was that question to me?
Yeah, that was you.
Oh, perfect. I didn't know what to. So it's a complicated question, and it's more like,
keep your complicated answer to 30 seconds or less. Just joking.
So like the act of creating or giving birth to culture doesn't mean that that culture is perfect, and that you won't have to keep on assessing it and improving it. And it could that you create something and you revert to ethnocide and you screw up, you regress or digress. But the process in the US, if you live in a place that's exploitative, you acknowledge or you have to start creating sustainable culture so you can aspire to have an Eǔtopian space. And that's, you know, ethnogenesis aligns with ethnocide linguistically. I think cultural naissance gives people a reminder that you actually have to birth something new and not just have a rebirth of something that you thought was grand in the past, like, you know, the Greeks or the Romans or something. And so,
Great. That being said, we're going to close our Diaspora Peoples Month. Please use this month in our talks as really just a starting point to kick off to something else. You know, our whole purpose was to really just put these conversations out there. You know, I know most of our artists and most of the conversations was kind of these little sparks that made people want to go a little bit further and go a little bit deeper. And I think the point is that we can't answer all the questions and that we can't have these discussions in 15-minute increments or 1 hour or 2 hours. This is an ongoing thing. But just a little bit of the housekeeping stuff as usual is sel.community to follow more of the work of the Sustainable Culture Lab, SAMASAMAart.com to learn, to get all of the links and information to all the participating artists tonight. And obviously you can get information from both websites. You'll receive a follow-up email with everyone's links and information and any resources that the artist wanted to share. We'll go ahead and send that. And also feel free to follow everybody on Instagram and send your direct questions if you need. Mostly everybody's really receptive to continuing that conversation separately. So please do so. The Word is a newsletter that the Sustainable Culture Lab puts out every week. And yeah, so stay tuned and keep it going. This isn't the end, all. Thank you all, Lovely and Peap, for joining tonight.
Thank you.
Wait, don't leave yet. Don't leave yet. Hold on.
Lovely's got an amazing thing. Are you going to give us some air horns, Les?
There is no air horns, but I'm about to play some Filipino records and maybe play some Khmer records too. Well, we'll see. But I just have a few minutes, so I'm about to play Mr. Pure Energy himself, Gary Valenciano, for Lovely. Yeah, go get your food or whatever you need to do. I have a mic.
Ano pa kaya ang dapat gawin ng isang katulad ko upang paniwalaan at intindihin mo ang mga nais sabihin ng puso ko. Bigyan mo ako ng pagkakataon, paliwanagan ang iyong isip. Kahit sandali lang, patutunayan ko lang na mahal kita hanggang ngayon. Oh, ang babae nakakatuwa, maliit na bagay lamang pinalalaki pa. Ba't ayaw mong limutin ang nakaraan? Di mo na ako pinapansin, di na rin minamasdahan. Huwag mo na sanang isipin ang mga nangyari sa atin noon. Kahit ano pang sabihin mo, mababalik pa natin ang kahapon. Sana naman nandito na lang ang paghihirap kong ito. Dapat pabandaanin sa galit o tampuhan. Dadami pang problemang di kailangan. Kailan pa ba o di na ba tayo magkakasunduan? Kahit sandali lang, patutunayan ko lang na minamahal mo pa ako. Oo, ang babae nakakaaliw, kahit sobra siyang pakibot siya'y nakakabaliw. Ba't ayaw mong limutin ang nakaraan? Di mo na ako pinapansin, di na rin pinamasdahan. Huwag mo na sanang isipin ang mga nangyari sa atin noon. Kahit ano pang sabihin mo, mababalik pa natin ang kahapon. Huwag mo na sanang Sabihin mo, mababalik pa natin ang ahapon. Wag mo na sana isipin, 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 wow, wow, wag mo na sana isipin, wag mo na sana isipin. Maraming beses na kitang nilayasan, iniwanan na ibang pinuntahan. Parang babaeng ang hirap talagang malimutan. Ikaw lamang ang aking laging pinabalikan. Manila, I keep coming back to Manila. Simply ain't no place like Manila. Manila, I'm coming home. I walked the streets of San Francisco. I tried the rides in Disneyland. Dated a million girls in Sydney. Somehow I feel like I don't belong. Hinahanap kita Manila. Ang ingay mong kay sarap sa tenga. Mga jeepney mong nagliliparan. Mga babae mong nagagandahan. Take me back in your arms, Manila, and promise me you'll never let go. Promise me you'll never let go. Manila, Manila, I keep coming back to Manila. Simply ain't no place like Manila. Manila, I'm coming home. Hinahanap kita Manila. Ang ingay mong kay sarap sa tenga. Mga jeepney mong nagliliparan. Mga babae mong nagagandahan. Take me back in your arms, Manila, and promise me you'll never let go. Promise me you'll never let go. Manila, Manila, miss you like hell, Manila. No place in the world like Manila. I'm coming home to stay.
រឿងអានៃយើងហើយលើប្របើកលៀនទៅចាយព្រោះតានបាក់ហើយអាឡ័យមានពេលហើយតែរកបានមិនហត់ចដោចាំពីអាទិត្យហើយអរចិនមិនប្រណាមានគូថ្មី
Hi, Rani. 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 All right, I'm about to play my last song.
你不要不要再说你爱我，你不要不要再缠着我，你老头老花样没人欣赏你，你花言巧语赚得坏主意。你不要不要发表恋爱经，你不要不要教我谈爱情，你老头老花样没人欣赏你，你花言巧语赚得坏主意。你本来是一个爱情骗子，你原来是一个情场无赖，你根本是一个春花神手。去，你快回去！你不要不要再说你爱我，你不要不要再来缠着我，你老头老花样没人欣赏你，你花言巧语赚得坏主意。去，你快回去！你不要不要再说你爱我，你不要不要再来缠着我，你老头老花样没人欣赏你，你花言巧语赚得坏主意，赚得坏主意，赚得坏主意。赚得坏主意。
Peace out, y'all. Good night. Thank you. I love Rani.